Most of my professional life, I have been an executive. I spent 6 years with the World Bank in Washington, D.C. I spent 10 years with a chemical company in Paris. So I worked in finance, I worked in marketing, and after that, I spent about 7 years as CEO of an insurance company in Cyprus, life insurance. At some point, I decided that I love creativity and innovation, and that it's time for me to do my own thing. So that is when I really dedicated my work to creativity, innovation, and leadership. Although all of these subjects had been top of my mind, if you like, for my whole professional career.
Okay, you speak a lot about both creativity and innovation, and sometimes people use those terms as though they're synonymous. So I was wondering, from your point of view, is there a difference between creativity and innovation, or do you use the two terms synonymously?
Not absolutely synonymously. They're very close. They are about new things. They are about applying new things. But in my lexicon, innovation embodies also the value that you get from the value that you get from this something new. So you cannot have innovation without creativity. It's not possible. It's something new. You imagine something new, and it's something new that is applied. It happens. It's not just imagination. But innovation is what makes sure that it brings some value to somebody. Well, I think we do have social innovation too, and that is a meaningful term as well, because it might not have value in a market, but it might have innovation might have value in a community, or value that cannot be monetized or internalized in a market, but still be very valuable.
Okay.
So it's just that it has to have value, whereas creativity might or might not have value.
Well, some people would argue that if it doesn't have value, it's not really creativity. For example, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, he argues that for creativity to be called creativity, it has to undergo this social evaluation. And if society doesn't think that there is any value in it, we can't really call it creativity. It's just an idea.
Yeah, okay, it's novelty without bringing value. That is possible. I accept Mihai Csikszentmihalyi's definition. However, most of his work deals with what in more simple jargon would be big C creativity,
yes.
which is rarer.
Yes, that's what I was going to, because you talk about radical innovation, and I was going to ask you whether by radical innovation you're talking about the same thing as Mihai Csikszentmihalyi refers to as big C creativity. Is it similar?
Similar, yes, not the same thing. I think big C creativity is important. It's rare. However, we would then divide the world into a very small number of people who sometimes we like to call them geniuses or very exceptional people, and say, well, those are creatives and the rest of us are not. I don't think that's true. I think everybody is creative. We can be creative by bringing small value to something, and many people bringing a lot of small new values to something can make something which is pretty big. Now, is radical innovation big C creativity? To a large extent, yes. To a large extent, I would say it is. Because it usually brings new value. Let's take an example. Google search engines. Google wasn't really the first, as a lot of us know, but it was the first really to scale up a search engine. And Google is in everybody's homes. Everybody who is on the internet knows what Google is and uses Google a lot. So that is life-changing. Which part of this did the Google people actually invent? They definitely invented the scaling up. They made it happen commercially. But from what I understand, their first algorithm was actually generated by the US government somewhere.
Yeah, that
So
takes us to the point that creativity never occurs in a vacuum, you know, and the systems thinkers, for example, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, he always emphasizes that fact that creativity does never occur in a vacuum. It's always built around other ideas, either from the past or in the contemporary environment. So
we agree 100% here, and innovation is not technology. Innovation is the way people assimilate technology and get the value out of it. Of course, there might well be technology. There's a technology being a new type of know-how, not necessarily gadgets with buttons and things like that, but it's the new know-how and the way people assimilate it that brings the value, and that is what I think innovation is.
Okay, and you talk about risks, and it's generally acknowledged that creativity and innovation entails risks. Therefore, a lot of organizations would prefer to be the second rather than the first in whatever new venture that is being, for example, Google, as you say, were not the first, you know, but it's those who were the first that took the risks, and those risks may have made them bankrupt. So do you think that there is, in terms of like being able to afford these risks, is there a certain size of organization that is able to be creative and innovative just because of the unfortunate events that can occur in terms of risk taking?
Well, I think organizations can be creative, organizations of any size can be creative. Even the big, today's internet juggernauts, they started in garages, or they started very small, some of them 35 years ago, some of them like Facebook, barely 15 years ago. The way a large company is creative is usually different from the way a startup is creative. It's the way. They both have to be creative.
And you talk about those who started in their garages and they took the risks. We only hear about those who succeeded. We don't hear about the 99% who started in their garages and never succeeded.
Yeah,
they took their own risks, and taking our own risks requires a very different kind of personality to taking risks within an organization.
Absolutely. You don't sell lots of books if you say how company X failed. Neither do you sell lots of books if you document lots of failure cases, which in fact can be quite useful, but that's academically useful. They're not popular books usually. We're in a culture as well, talking about a Western culture that values success a lot. There is a lot of failure before success can happen in any case. And yes, the startups have to have an appetite for risk. In fact, all innovation have to have an appetite for risk. Now, that's the organization, which sounds abstract, but the risk, it's in fact people who are taking the risk. And there is, even if you are in a big company, when you're doing new things, you are taking a personal risk as well.
Yeah, the personal risk being that if you don't provide the success that the company wants you to provide, you will lose your job and you might lose your house. So in every organization, there's always that kind of that fear, perhaps.
Yes, and you lose your credibility within the organization. And organizations, as they get older, tend to have ways of working and not like to change them as much as they do when they're just starting up. So there are organizations that, in a way, ring fence risk and say, okay, take risks if you think it's if a risk is likely to be catastrophic, like you can't let one bank trader bring down a bank. You cannot you cannot tell somebody who's responsible for the security of a nuclear power plant to take as many risks as you like. No, there you have zero tolerance for failure. If the risk is likely to be catastrophic, then of course you will have checks and balances. However, most of our decisions, most of business is not like that. So organizations that manage to accept risk and say, okay, have a go at that, then these are the ones that tend to be more innovative.
Okay. And in your video, you also talk about the notion of idea killers. And again, it's to do with language. And I'm wondering if you're, when you talk about idea killers, are you talking about what we call social evaluation? Because at the end of the day, it's society that evaluates what they want to accept and what they don't. And you might have very many good ideas, but society will kill them off. Is there a similarity there?
Yes, yes, of course there is. I think there are people who will use their judgment very quickly and very fast when maybe they shouldn't be doing that. There are times when all of us should be using our judgment quickly, but there are times when we shouldn't. And postponing the judgment for a while is usually good for creativity. I once had a minister in one of my courses, and he said, "Does it mean that I have to agree with every silly thing everybody comes to tell me?" He was a CEO of a company at the time, and I said, "No. You don't have to agree with it, but you have to accept it. You have to give it a chance. Maybe you will accept it in a modified form. Maybe it will bring you to another idea. Maybe you will reject it, but give it a chance." And that kind of attitude, I think, varies from person to person.
That's interesting what you say, because I'm not sure if you're familiar with the work of Malcolm Gladwell. Malcolm Gladwell talks about gut instincts being the most accurate, because he talks about when we determine quality in terms of artwork, it's usually our gut instinct that tells us that there's quality in one piece of art and not, and that the second piece of art might be fake. So sometimes it's that instinctive feeling that tells us whether there is quality or whether there isn't.
Yeah, I'm not sure I agree with Malcolm Gladwell. Yes, there is instinct, but I think the instinct is based on something, some prior knowledge, some sort of feeling that we haven't yet identified precisely. The point is, there is a personal, there's a judgmental part in there's a judgmental something in each one of us. It's a necessary thing for us to function. In some people, it's very strong. And as soon as an idea comes up, they become idea killers because they're extremely judgmental. Yeah. And many times they might be right because they're experts, because they have experience, etc., etc. Now, too much of that is not good for creativity. Yeah. It's good for creativity part 2 when we start implementing.
You probably noticed, Dimis, in your work, you've probably noticed that sometimes the same idea, it depends on who's expressing that idea. You might have a man and a woman and, different types of people expressing the same ideas, but it's accepted when one person says it, but not accepted when someone else says the very same thing.
unfortunately, human beings are organized in organizations with an infinitesimal number of exceptions tend to be hierarchies, sometimes for good reason as well. I mean, you tend to be higher up the hierarchy with when you have some experience as well. And that in many ways is a good thing too. However, the most senior person in the room, if he or she brings out an idea, it's more likely that the other people will listen than if somebody else brings up the idea and the top, he or she in the room, dismisses it in some way. And yes, I haven't studied the gender issue, but there is probably one, which I'm not so familiar with, if you like.
Yes, I've noticed that just from my own experience. So there's the gender issue, there's the race issue, there's the hierarchical issue, you know, so power struggles there. But
sure,
something else as well, that there is Jordan Peterson, who talks about how hierarchies are, you know, that he makes connections between the animal world and saying hierarchies are natural, whereas a lot of people who are creative tend to prefer networks rather than hierarchies, which are more oppressive. What do you think? Do you think in terms of networks which expand, or hierarchies which, you know, can have a lot of structure? Do you think structure is more necessary for creativity, or the flexibility of networks?
Well, I think both are. If hierarchies exist, it's because they've proven their worth. They do and can provide efficiencies. Now, there are points when they begin to provide more inefficiencies than they do efficiencies. So when we're talking about change, for example, innovation is always change. We're talking about doing new things. New, if it's a small new, you need small change. If it's a big new, you need a big change. But change tends to be sticky for a large number of reasons, and most of them are human. And we all use the phrase silos. It's people who have their own little kingdoms or fiefdoms or whatever in an organization, and change is fine within their own fiefdom. But if it's outside, and if it's encroaching upon what they think is their own power, they will probably resist it. In an organization, and if you forget about startups, in an existing organization, everybody has to be efficient, operationally efficient. You need to serve your client today. You need to produce your product or your service today and do it well. But then you also have to be creative and innovative, and innovation is what is going to bring you the value, not today, a little bit further down. Now, is it tomorrow or the day after tomorrow? We can argue about that. But we only have 24 hours in a day. So if everybody is focused 100% on operational efficiency all the time, they won't innovate. And you're absolutely right. There is a trade-off here. This is why an innovative organization needs to take a decision, and it's a hard decision. And in a hierarchy, this decision is taken at the top, should be taken at the top, that this is about how much resource we can devote to being efficient or doing small incremental changes. And this is the time we should be spending, we should be giving to creativity. And of course, it will vary from one person to another, from one department to another. It will be different, but it cannot be zero. If it's zero time for creativity is zero innovation.
Okay, great. And I think Google adopts that kind of policy. They have a lot of leeway. They have a lot of playtime available for their workers. Yeah. And at the same time, they're very efficient.
As far as I know, Google asks for all of its engineers to spend 20% of their time inventing new things, either generating the ideas or figuring out how to put them in practice. And they don't like incremental ideas. They don't like ideas that will give you a improvement in quality. They want ideas that will multiply your productivity or whatever you're aiming at by 5 or 10. They're into big things. That's the company policy as I understand it. I think it's an understanding that creativity and innovation go hand in hand, and that when you're talking about the level of the organization, we can be creative as individuals, in our families, in our communities, in our companies, in our countries. But if you look at the organizational level, there are lots of things that make a company creative. I would say if you put them in categories, the first would be, I call them the sources of creativity and appreciation and understanding, good understanding of creativity. The second one would be a structure, because we're talking about companies. We're not talking about solitary artists working in their studios. A lot of the work is collaborative. And of course, the third and the most important, culture. And culture is a little bit harder to grasp than structures. It involves behaviors, attitudes, norms, and assumptions.
Yes.
So you have to blend a lot of things together to make an organization innovative and keep it innovative over time.